Great to see you both. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's obviously begin with the vaccine rollout, and historic day for Australia. Ebony, do you think that this gives Australians confidence moving forward that we could potentially return to some normality?
Look, I really hope so, and I hope that the public does embrace getting vaccinated as soon as possible so that we can all return to normal as much as possible. This will be a great thing for Australia and for its economy, and importantly for saving lives. I think it's regrettable it's taken so long, but I also understand that there's a lot of safety processes that have to be gone through. I thought it was really good to see Greg Hunt this morning address some of the quite real and reasonable hesitancies that some people in the population, including young women who might be pregnant or intending to become so, who might be hesitant about the vaccine. I think that will be really important to seeing huge take-up. But I was really disturbed to see reports of police violence against what looked like largely peaceful, if misguided, anti-vaccination protests in Melbourne. I don't think that kind of heavy-handed response will encourage anyone to go out and get vaccinated. So I think it's really important that we're reaching out to people who are hesitant with good explanations and clear information rather than any kind of crackdown, especially considering the vaccine isn't mandatory. So no one has to take it unless they want to.
Yeah, and just on that, Gideon, I mean, do you think the government as a whole has done enough to reassure Australians that the vaccines here will be safe? Has the messaging been clear enough, do you think?
Look, I do, and it's not so much about messaging. And Scott Morrison has received a lot of criticism for going slow on the approval process of this. I'm not one of those people who has criticised him. I think we've actually done the right thing in going through the proper checks to make sure that a new drug that has been rushed to market is safe to use. I was always sceptical of them being able to find a cure for this coronavirus because a coronavirus of this type has never been vaccinated against anywhere ever. I am very, very pleasantly surprised. This appears to be a miracle of modern science. All accounts from, for example, Israel, which has had a high rate of vaccination, shows that this is up to 90% effective in lowering the rate of hospitalisation and severe illness. I think it is a really, really good thing, and I think Australians have every reason to have faith in it. However, what I would like to see is what incentive there is beyond the obvious health benefits in us rushing to get this vaccine. And by that I mean, how much will our lives go back to normal? At every turn through this coronavirus crisis, our so-called leaders have reneged on the deals they've made with the people in winding back restrictions and moved the goalposts. We were told this was about flattening the curve. We did that. Restrictions persisted. We were told that this was hinged on a vaccine being created. Now, we have no guarantee of when restrictions will be eased as a result of the vaccine being rolled out. We were told that restrictions would be eased in terms of lockdowns when we reached 0 cases in places like Victoria. Restrictions were eased, but a lot slower than they reasonably should have been. So Scott Morrison and the state premiers more so have to come out now and say what rate of vaccination will it take to get rid of mask mandates, lockdowns and border closures once and for all? And what rate of vaccination will it take for Scott Morrison to do his job and protect the integrity of our federation and the Constitution by putting a stop to these disruptive, cruel and, not needless to say, hugely inconvenient border closures?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the vaccination rollout does slow the rate of the ongoing border closures. So I guess that's a remain to be seen. But look, let's move on, because one of the biggest stories of the week has, of course, been the Brittany Higgins rape allegations. There's been a lot of timeline issues. There's reports the Prime Minister's office was made aware, or at least someone in the office was aware of the alleged rape. The Prime Minister's office says he didn't know about it, but text messages reveal the office did. Ebony, does it look and sound like a cover-up?
Well, increasingly, I think people are being left with that impression because anyone who's involved in politics knows no minister likes to be surprised by anything, certainly not the Prime Minister, and certainly once the media gets a hold of a story. It's inconceivable to a lot of people that no one would have told the Prime Minister about this. So I think there still remain several questions, really important ones, to be answered here. And it's not going to be good enough for the Prime Minister or anyone else in the government to be shutting down those types of questions by saying, well, this is now a police matter, or it's a matter for the, half a dozen reviews that they've announced. The police don't set the standards. that operate here in Parliament. The police aren't in charge of the culture here in Parliament. The police don't set sexual harassment policies, and the police aren't in charge of what happens within a workplace here to protect the other people. I've been really disturbed to hear more recently about other allegations, not of assault in the nature of the case that everyone has been discussing this week, but in Craig Kelly's office there has been allegations that a senior aide has been involved in serially sexually harassing young women members of staff and volunteers and interns, some as young as 16 or 17. And it appears from reports that Craig Kelly believes the perpetrator in that case, who still remains on staff, but there's no indication of whether or not Craig Kelly spoke to those young victims about their side of the story, what investigations were undertaken, and what, if any, changes were implemented within that office in response to those allegations. So anything from sexual harassment all the way through to the horrific rape allegations that we have before us, it's important that the Prime Minister is leading on this and not just referring it away to all of these reviews and leaving it to be a police matter. Yeah. The women of Parliament, and sexual harassment and assault applies to men as well. They're often victims as well. It's a workplace safety matter. Everyone deserves to be safe working here in Parliament House.
Does it represent, I guess, Gideon, then a cultural problem in Parliament House? Is this part of a broader issue?
Look, Look, we are talking here, Danica, about the rape of an alleged rape of an unconscious woman. That is a revolting and disgusting and indeed highly criminal act anyway. The fact that it could happen in Parliament House, in the seat of Australian democracy, in the office of a Minister of the Crown, should make every Australian incandescent with rage. In the topic of workplace culture, look, there is absolutely a discussion to be had about sexual harassment in the workplace, not least of all in Parliament House. There is absolutely a conversation to be had about the treatment of women in the workplace generally. But what I fear with this discussion about culture, and as Ebony alluded to, this launching into a series of half a dozen reviews on the matter, I think risks trivialising the incident. I think burying this shocking act under HR newspeak and corporatist whitewashing, I think trivialises the seriousness of the incident. I think it diffuses the culpability of the alleged perpetrator, and I think ultimately it robs or it distracts from the accountability that Scott Morrison and his office should have had in how much they knew about this and when. I think we need to focus first and foremost here on what should be most important of all, which is justice for the alleged victim and working out how this was ever buried to the extent that it apparently was. And I guess to answer your question, working out how we can ensure that this never ever happens again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's bipartisan on these allegations being absolutely horrific. Just want to touch on Facebook. Of course, this week, Facebook has decided to block Australian news sites. Ebony, is what the social media platform doing a threat to democracy, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's not unreasonable to view it in that way. It was certainly a threat that Facebook had made when the legislation was first introduced, and they've followed through on that threat by implementing the news blackout. But they were either very strong-armed in their tactics or very, haphazard, because it took up a whole bunch of government websites, domestic violence service websites, or Facebook pages, and other things, including the Bureau of Meteorology, that all got caught up in that. And it really, I think, sent a shiver down the spine of a lot of governments all around the world, that if they try and regulate Facebook, that this is the type of retaliation that they can expect. And I think Facebook might have overplayed its hand a bit there. But of course, the original problem that the ACCC was trying to solve with the News Media Bargaining Code is that together Google and Facebook are monopolies when it comes to digital advertising in Australia. They account for around 81 cents of every digital advertising dollar, and that in itself is a threat to journalism and by proxy to our democracy in future, because digital advertising is part of what funds public interest journalism, and the news media organisations in Australia simply do not have the bargaining power to strike effective deals with both of them. So it is important legislation. Google is now negotiating and has formed deals with a bunch of media companies. It remains to be seen whether or not Facebook will keep the news blackout in place, but I certainly was pleased to hear that Minister Greg Hunt talked about the department withdrawing and reviewing its use of Facebook advertising. I think all government departments should be doing the same, as the Australia Institute Centre for Responsible Technology called for today. It's very sensible. And then down the track, if Facebook still won't play ball, still doesn't want to be regulated, still wants to keep all of its market power and refuse that type of sensible regulation, the government should certainly be looking at other avenues like a tax on digital advertising.
Gideon, do you agree? Perhaps that's what should be looked at down the track?
No, I don't agree, Danica. Look, I've been very, very amused and not without a sense of schadenfreude this week to see the same political and media class who largely defended Facebook's right to blackball Donald Trump and Craig Kelly as a private company now bemoan their blocking of the Sydney Morning Herald on the basis they're a public utility. You can't have it both ways. And you can't have it both ways in terms of the alleged content being stolen here. You can't say that Facebook is stealing news content by allowing people to put up on its website and then complain when they block people putting up links to its website. That's like having your house broken into and then complaining when the thief no longer comes back and breaks into your house again. Look, like every other red-blooded conservative, I have a lot of issues with big tech. I don't like their power. I don't like their censoriousness. But government regulation will always backfire. By inserting the hand of coercive government into the equation with powerful social media monopolies, all you will do is risk turning natural monopolies into government-backed monopolies and inevitably create some sort of licensing. The only way to mitigate the issues that big tech are posing for us all in terms of free and open debate is to allow space in the market for other platforms, such as the platform being launched by Donald Trump that I was very pleased to hear about just now on Sky as I sat here, to operate and do a better job at what Facebook is already doing. And frankly, if I can be brutally honest, the only way to address shortcomings in advertising revenue for legacy media is for them to revamp their business models. The fact of the matter is that consumer behaviour is changing. People are not. Well, they haven't done it enough. They are still reliant on paywalls, on subscriptions and things like that. People don't generally engage with the news that way. They like to read a range of different articles curated by social media. Somebody has to figure out a way to make people pay per article or some sort of aggregator service like Spotify does for music. But getting the federal government to engage in some sort of smash and grab job on behalf of legacy media was never going to work. And as people have seen this week, it's backfired.
Yes, well, some have actually called it a dummy spit by Facebook this week. So I guess make what you will of it, but it certainly had provided some commentary over the internet. We have to leave it there. Ebony Bennett, Gideon Rosner, great to chat. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Danica. Thanks, Ebony.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.